ce que c'est ICANN. Yaouri, merci pour la présentation. Je pense que ICANN fait beaucoup de choses pour l'IPV6. Par exemple, pour les nouveaux domaines de premier niveau, les nouveaux domaines génériques de premier niveau, dans l'application Caïro, qui a une condition pour les demandeurs de premier qu'il ait l'IPV6 et le DNS. Donc, c'est une manière de promouvoir le déploiement de l'IPV6. Aussi, je crois qu'ICANN fait beaucoup d'actions de sensibilisation pour l'IPV6. Pas exclusivement, mais ils essaient toujours de pousser vers ça. Pourquoi? Eh bien, parce que la source des adresses IP, c'est ICANN. C'est IAN. C'est IAN, c'est ICANN. On l'appelle PTI. Après la transition, on l'a appelé Poste Transition IAN. C'est ça, c'est là que vient le mot PTI. Et après, ils ont trouvé, parce qu'on va inclure dans les bylaws, ils ont trouvé un mot beaucoup plus, un nom beaucoup plus, comment dire, accepté par les juristes. Mais en fait, l'origine, c'est post-transition. Merci encore une fois, Léonie. Maintenant, on va passer au deuxième orateur, qui est M. Jordi Martinez. Jordi est espagnol, catalan, il est pas séparatiste. Il dit qu'il est un citoyen du monde, parce qu'il est toujours en train de voyager. Jordi est très actif au niveau des adresses. D'abord, il est le CEO, le PDG et le directeur technique d'une entreprise qui s'appelle, tenez-vous bien, de IPV6 Company. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'y en a pas d'autre, il n'y a que lui. Jordi, par exemple, hier, j'ai été à la réunion de Afrique à Al-Mechtel la semaine dernière, et cette semaine, au début de cette semaine, et Jordi, j'ai découvert que Jordi propose des politiques à tous les registres régionaux, excepté à l'IPV6. Mais tous les autres registres, toujours chaque fois qu'il y a une nouvelle politique, c'est Jordi qui l'a. Donc, c'est vous dire combien il est impliqué et combien il est intéressé, combien il est spécialiste, il est expert dans ce domaine-là. Donc, je vais demander à Jordi de nous parler un petit peu de la tendance, de l'évolution du déploiement de l'IPV6 dans le monde et aussi de dire si ce déploiement va trop vite ou pas, s'il est en train de ne pas avancer beaucoup plus vite que aussi.
Actually,
Jordi ne comprend pas, ne parle pas le français. Il parle espagnol, un peu de catalan et anglais. Il va parler en anglais maintenant. Il comprend pourquoi je ne traduis pas, parce qu'il comprend ce que je dis. Il comprend le français.
If I speak too fast, let me know. I slow down. I can understand a little bit of French, but if you speak slowly. Otherwise, somebody will need to help translating. I actually am proposing policies not just in this region, in all the regions, because I consider myself a citizen of the world, and when I see a problem in one region, typically the same problem is going to happen in the other places, and typically the solution will be almost the same. There are small cultural differences, but most of the time the technical problems have the same solution everywhere, typically. So yes, I am also proposing policies in aiding, not so many, but still some of them. I think I proposed it between last year and this year in all the 5 registries, about 25 policies. And in addition to that, 15 documents in ITF. So that's my extra work in addition to my daily work doing IPV6 deployment. So it's just for fun, maybe. Okay, so I was, for some reason in the agenda, I was suspecting that our colleague from Africa will be speaking first. So I was trying to avoid repeating some slides that he will have for sure, which statistics from Africa. So I don't have any statistics from Africa. I guess you have some. And even if the idea of my presentation was worldwide statistics, I have a mixed presentation. I have something of that, but I also want to look at trends, and some of the trends are based on my experience, some of them are maybe just my imagination, but I really think I will be right, okay? So feel free to interpret this a little bit open, not necessarily I'm going to be right, but in general my experience says that when I say something, after a few years it happens. So I guess I have a kind of crystal ball here. So let's see if I am right on all these predictions. So when we look at the IPV6 deployment, there are many people doing statistics, and one of the most well-known is probably from Google. If you go to google.com/IPV6, you will be able to see this. And you can also get a picture of the wall and click on every country and see how is the deployment. And right now, Google is telling us that more or less, we have about 25% deployment in the world. 25% is a lot, okay? It's not a minimum penetration, it's a lot, but this is wrong. If I combine statistics from different sources, the resource shows it's more close to 30%, okay? And the reason for that is that, of course, Google is taking measurements from what they see in the networks, but there are other networks. They do some escalation and so on, but the reality is that there is a little bit more. There is something interesting. If you pick a specific day, you see it's not a dot, it's like a vertical line. Why it happens? It's very interesting. When you take the measurements during the week, it's not the same as when you take the measurements during the weekend. Because, unfortunately, there is more deployment in service providers that provide services to end users, not to enterprises. And especially, there are more applications and contents in networks used by end users, not enterprises like Google, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, these kind of things. So what it means, during the weekends, we see more IPv6 deployment than during the week, okay? So we need always to take those measurements from, let's say, one step up. Not really trust exactly the measurements from one side or the other. It's just to give us an idea about how is it going. There is a similar page, it's not so well known, from Facebook, where we have more or less the same figures as in the case of Google. Here I took the map, so you see the wall, and you see some countries which are very green, others which are light blue, others which are dark blue, and that's clearly showing what is the level of penetration in different regions, right? So we see, for example, let's see if the pointer works, yes. We see, for example, India. India got a huge penetration of IPv6. I can tell you, if we have time during the day, I can tell you the history behind that, okay? Because it's an history of two brothers fighting together. And because they are fighting, one of them deployed IPv6 to get more success. I can give you more details after that. So, it's strange. How come India, more than 50% deployment? Well, this happened just 1 year ago. It was zero deployment in India 1 year ago. And from one day to the other, it passed from 0 to almost 50%. Okay? So that's a very interesting thing, and that happens in a lot of countries. There is another measurement done by ICANN, and it's more or less, again, showing the same. They use different colors than Facebook and Google, but the history is the same. As more yellow you have, it's closer to the green, which is the 100% deployment. Of course, no country right now has 100% deployment yet, but there are several countries that are beyond the 50%, and this is a lot. This is a big penetration of IPv6. If we go into the figures, I don't think you are going to be able to read that, but I'm going to tell you this column here is the measurements from, let me remember, ICANN. And this one is the measurements from Facebook. And in ICANN, you see the first one is India, while in Facebook, The first one is Saint Bartholomew, an island from the Caribbean. Okay. The second one for APNIC is Belgium. The third one is United States, Germany, Greece, and so on. For Facebook is Belgium, India, United States, Germany, Greece, then Uruguay. So there are small differences depending on from where you take the measurement. We were speaking before starting, and I got a question about why in the internet exchangers there is only 5%. Because today, the bigger networks that provide IPv6 contents, like YouTube, all the Google business, let's say, or units or services, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., Netflix, all of them provide to the ISPs free caches. And that means that the content is available there without going through the internet exchanges. Okay? So that means you have much more deployment than what you can measure depending on where you are measuring. So it's really difficult to do the measurement, but at the end, if you combine all that together, you get a good idea. That's why I said it's not really 25%. My own perspective is we are closer to the 50% than to what Google is saying or others are saying. Okay. So now, this is just measurements anyway. What can be the reasons for ISPs and any kind of, in general, service providers, never mind is for end users or enterprises to deploy IPv6? If you follow the NANOC mailing list, NANOC is the operators group of North America. There are similar operator groups. I don't know if there is a NOC, Network Operators Group in Tunisia, but all of them have open mailing lists. In this case, obviously, is in English. You see people saying, hey, I started to deploy carrier grenade. Everybody knows what is carrier grenade here? Yeah? Okay, carrier grenade is because we are running out of IPv4 addresses, some ISPs, instead of deploying IPv6, they put a big carrier box, which is a big NAT. Okay? So instead of having a NAT in your router, you have, in addition to the NAT in your router, you have a big NAT in the operator. So you are doing two levels of NAT. You are translating IPv4 to IPv4 twice. So you have private addresses in different places, not just in the private network, but also in the public network, in the ISP network. And that's breaking many applications and services. And that has additional implications. So for example, PlayStation Network, Sony PlayStation Network, when they detect IPv4 addresses behind a carrier grenade, they block those addresses and they put them in a blacklist. So if you are an ISP and instead of deploying IPv6, you are using carrier grenade to escape from the deployment of IPv6, you are investing in boxes which are expensive and give you troubles. Okay? So it's not the right strategy. But there is one additional implication. Sharing addresses with carrier grenade means that the same IPv4 address that I have in my home will be the same for my neighbor and the other neighbor. And what Europol is the European, let's say, Union of law enforcement authorities, is the equivalent to Interpol, but in Europe. They did a workshop because they are having criminal cases that cannot be resolved because one IP address belongs to 60 people. And if one of them is a criminal and you are the neighbor, you are sharing your IP address with a criminal. And that's a big problem. Okay? So there are considerations behind the exhaustion of IPv4 that you can say, okay, we can keep doing that and more NAT and more NAT instead of going to deploy IPv6. This is wrong, and this is going to give you as an ISP or as a service provider. For example, I guess most of you here are from universities, maybe government. For you as well, it's creating problems because when you are sharing addresses among your students, It means if one of them is misbehaving, it's really difficult to know who we checked it before. We know it because everybody is using that in their private networks, but now it's even more difficult if the ISP is doing also another level of that. Some people, and I took this from a conference, a recent conference in Australia, some people is saying, okay, let's invest in carrier grade net boxes. And what happens is that a carrier grade net box, at the beginning, 5 years ago, it was costing $1 million. Now it's cheaper because the Chinese started selling them as well. So at the beginning was Juniper, Cisco selling them. Now we have Huawei and other companies, right? So it's cheaper. But every box costs 250,000 US dollars. And of course, if you are an ISP, you need at least two, because you need to provide redundancy to your network, high availability. If in addition to that, you have 1 million customers, you will need to have several boxes, because maybe one box can handle only 150,000 customers. Okay? So they said, okay, if we buy carrier net boxes, we will spend in the next 3 years that amount of millions of dollars. And what they are missing is that by doing that, when they use the public addresses in the carrier net, they will be blocked, as I just explained it, like, for example, by OpenVPN or OpenDNS or Sony PlayStation and things like that, and many other services in the world need to really block them because they cannot identify who is the one that should first in the game, okay? Because the IP address is the same. So by doing that, you are investing in carrier net boxes, and at the end, you will need to invest again in buying IPv4 addresses. At the moment in Africa, you are lucky because you still can get addresses. But in 6 months from now, more or less, you will start getting more and more restrictions to get new IPv4 addresses. So this is going to change here as well. It's the situation already in the rest of the world. It's coming here as well, okay? So my recommendation is don't go to carrier net. Go strike to get sufficient addresses. But of course, that will not last forever. And you need to, at the same time, deploy IPv6. Deploying IPv6 is not difficult. It's just different than IPv4. It's easier actually, but you need to learn it. That's the big difficulty. Training. That's the big problem everywhere. It's not just in Africa. It's in everywhere. We need to train people about IPv6. So, what I think is going to happen? Well, the first thing is, if we are now close to the 30% of the deployment, my expectation is that in just 2 years from now, most of the world, so average, will be above the 50 or even 60% deployment in just 2 years from now. So if you don't deploy IPv6 now, you will be behind, okay? It's not difficult to deploy IPv6, but it takes time. For an ISP, it may take 6 months or 1 year. So you really need to start today. You should have started yesterday, in fact, okay? And this is, again, not just for ISP, government networks, universities, all of them, enterprises, financial sector. We were talking before also about a bank, a big bank in Netherlands, the Rabobank. When they were interviewed 2 years ago about why they are deploying IPv6, they said, because the ISPs are deploying carrier net, we cannot anymore identify customers, so we cannot trust online banking anymore. That's crazy. We are going back like the crabs, okay? So what happens is, instead of going to better services and applications, with the deployment of carrier net, we have less and less services that we can trust. That's no way. So, in addition to this prediction of in 2 years from now we are going to happen about 50 or even 60% deployment, and this is very easy to explain. If you took the percentage of services that have more penetration, more traffic in internet, again they are YouTube, Google, Netflix, Facebook, and so on. And if you go into any ISP network and look how much is the percentage of those services, is 60%, 65%, even 75% in some networks. So what that means, if an ISP turn on IPv6, they will get already more than 60% of traffic in one day, just by turning on IPv6 in the network. Okay? So clearly, it means that even if we look at the graphics that I had before, like a linear growth, it's not linear. It's like doing jumps. And in fact, if I exit the presentation and go to, let me see how I do this, to share the screen. Here, yeah. So if we look at those pictures, this is from UK. You see here that it's not linear. It's one big jump, another jump, another jump, another jump. If we look at Uruguay, it's the same. Look, this big jump. Just one ISP deploying IPv6, it means it goes from 0 to 30% or to 40 or to 50%. Just one ISP. And of course, the competition in every country means once one ISP go with IPv6, the others are forced to go as well. That's competition. You can see the same for Belgium, for example. In this case, there was an agreement between different ISPs to go at the same time. So you can see less jumps here, but still, in this case, it's India. Look at this, from 0 to, I think it was 50% exactly. Okay, so it's big jumps just because one ISP, and then the others come very, very soon, right? So let's go back to the presentation. It works. Yeah. So what is going to happen in addition to this kind of growth, which again it means it's not linear, it's jumps and jumps and jumps, and maybe during 6 months there is no jump, there is no growth. But then in 2 or 3 different countries, 3 big ISPs, and you get 5 or 10% jump in the global table, okay, in the global statistics. That's going to happen. And that means it's going to take less than 2 years to reach 50% in my prediction. Okay? I buy you a dinner if I am wrong. In 2 years from now, we organize another event and I buy you a dinner if I am wrong. Okay? Done? Deal? Okay. So in addition to that, the way to go and the way networks are going is what we call IPv6 only. What means IPv6 only? Well, the first thing here is most of the people talked about the IPv6 migration. This is wrong. This is not a migration. Migration is when you have Windows XP and we install Windows 8 or 9 or 10 and you lost the track of the version number. You don't keep both of them. But in IPv6, we do a transition and coexistence. And the ITF designed protocols not for migration, but for transition and coexistence. So if this is the traffic of the world in a balance, this is IPv4 traffic. Today is 70%. This is only 30%. It's going to be like that. It's going to change the way. Okay? But we keep working IPv4 because if we disconnect IPv4, many applications will not work. We don't want to do that. We don't want to break things. So that's the reason talking about migration is wrong. And initially, we developed the coexistence and transition mechanism in ITF to have what we call one stack. So the idea is you have IPv4 and you deploy IPv6 and both of them coexist in every part of the network. What happens is that we have been too slow. So we exhausted IPv4 before having a complete IPv6 deployment. We cannot do that anymore. So now we need to do a trick. And the trick is having IPv6 only networks, especially in the access, So the last mile, maybe some core networks of the ISPs, and then to the customers, to the devices in the local area networks, we provide IPv4 as a service. So we have dual stack in the local area networks, but we don't have any more IPv4 in the access network or even in the core network. And we use transition mechanisms that we call IPv4 as a service to do that, okay? Recently, I have been working in a document in ITF that yesterday night I submitted finally the last version to get an RFC number, okay? So this document, you can see the link over there, it will be soon an RFC number, is mandating the CPE vendors, especially for the residentials, but also for companies, to have support for this type of transition mechanism. So it will be very easy for an ISP to provide this kind of CPE, or for the end user to go to the supermarket to buy it and get IPv6 native, but IPv4 as a service. Okay, so that's the reason. If you want to see a more specific example, just in the discussion that we had in ITF recently, T-Mobile, the responsible for the deployment of T-Mobile, of IPv6 in T-Mobile, which was one of the main operators and the bigger ones that deployed IPv6 in US, they told that using IPv4 as a service, they got already 75% of native IPv6 traffic, and they got only 24% traffic translated from IPv6 to IPv4, and then less than 1% being translated twice, okay? Maybe you don't understand very well this one. In the next slide, I will show you some more data to understand that one. So, unfortunately, I cannot find an updated slide like this. This is the 4 mobile operators in US. So it's T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, and AT&T. And this is 1.5 years ago. Okay, so it's August, I think it's August 2017, exactly. So, look, they had, at that time, 1.5 years ago, they had already 70% of the traffic being IPv6. If you deploy IPv6 in Tunisia now, you are going to reach the same or even higher than that. If you don't do that, if your applications don't have support for IPv6, for example, if a bank in Tunisia don't have support for IPv6, when a user visits US, they will get only IPv6. Maybe it's not going to work as expected because this transition mechanism. We try to make the transition mechanism to be perfect, but it's impossible to be perfect. Okay? So that's also a bad thing for people having businesses that may be accessed from outside their own country. You really need to provide in your businesses here, or to your students that are visiting other universities and so on, if they need to access your networks, you need to be IPv6 ready. Now, there are several IPv4 as a service transition mechanisms. My preferred one, and actually is the one that has more deployment in the world, is called 464X-LAT. Okay? I don't want to enter too much in the technical details. If you have questions, we can come later or in the break. But basically what 464X-LAT is doing is we keep the IPv4 public addresses in what we call a NAT64. So you need less addresses. The addresses are shared on the flight, which based on the needs of each user, you don't have a restriction on the number of ports. With CGN, you have a restriction. CGN is CGNAT. Carrying up, you have a restriction of the number of ports per user. Here you don't have that. And then the CPE or the cellular phone that, for example, Android has already support for 464X-LAT, you are getting this translation as needed. So that's the way T-Mobile is getting the data that I presented in the previous slide, okay? There are basically 3 possible use cases, and this is automatic. You don't need to do anything as a user or as an application developer for 464X-LAT. If your application is supporting IPv6 and the service or the web page or whatever you are accessing is already available with IPv6, there is no translation. Everything is native IPv6. This is the 75% that I mentioned before. Okay? If the application supports IPv6, but the service not, for example, an old web page, and this is the 24% in my data before, then there is a translation, a single translation in the NAT64. And finally, if you have an old application, or you type instead of a name, as we should do, and that's why we have IANN and ICANN to type names instead of addresses. But if you insist typing an address, then, because DNS is not working, we have this 1% or less than 1% double translation. Okay? So this is the way, very, very simple explanation, but you get an idea about why we need to do this and why this transition, IPv4 as a service, is a good thing, because we are reducing the number of translations and moving faster and faster to IPv6, while at the same time we allow all IPv4 service to keep working. We don't break things. That's the idea. We have already some universities in Brazil which presented in the last LACNIC meeting their plans to deploy this in the university so that they don't need, because they don't have, and they cannot get more IPv4 addresses in LACNIC. So either they go to buy addresses, and they are expensive, maybe $20, $25 per address, or they use this transition mechanism to allow the students, the teachers, to have dual stack while actually not using IPv4. And they don't notice it, it just works, okay? Now, going to the specific case of governments, there have been some governments in the world that took decisions to push for IPv6. I have been actually working with some of these governments. I was responsible for deploying IPv6 in the Spanish government network, and I was contracted also by Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Germany, many other countries, okay? So, I am not fan of regulation of internet. I don't like regulating internet. But I believe that when we are talking about a public network funded with the tax, with the money coming from the taxpayers, we need to make sure that the government is not wrongly investing in all IPv4 boxes. They need to support IPv6 because they need to defend the interests of the citizens, okay? So, what I did after 10 years, I succeeded to convince the Spanish government in 2011 to go for a law to deploy IPv6 at the government level. And that's an ongoing plan, okay? It takes time. It's not something that